morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever in the world you are. I have argued that Zimbabwe is a failed state primarily because we have failed to hold free, fair, and credible elections. We need democratic reforms to restore people's rights to a meaningful say in the governance of the country. That's at the heart of my argument. I've heard many responses, many of them uh, unfriendly from both sides of the political divide, ZANU-PF and the main opposition, MDC. Here is a typical remark I've got from the ZANU-PF supporters. It's arguing here that ZANU-PF needed to rig the elections because the West imposed economic sanctions on the regime for the primary purpose of regime change. Of course, that is nonsense. To start with, ZANU-PF started rigging the elections as far back as 1980, the country's first elections. ZANU-PF made it abundantly clear that if the party does not win those elections, the Bush war would continue. That wasn't really a free, fair, and credible election then, was it? And ever since they got into power, they've consolidated their position. Zimbabwe is a de facto one-party state. Elections, yes, are held regularly, but they are rigged every time. And it is nonsensical to then claim that we are rigging elections because sanctions were imposed. Sanctions were imposed in 2001. ZANU-PF has been rigging elections since 1980. In any case, to justify denying the people their fundamental right to a meaningful say in the governance of the country because the West imposed sanctions is the most idiotic argument one can present. You do not beat up your wife and children just because you quarreled with your neighbor. What have the children and wife to do with it? The right to free, fair, and credible election is at the heart of a free, fair, and democratic society. And only a party like ZANU-PF and its fanatical followers, supporters, would come up with such an idiotic argument to say people should be denied their right because the West imposed sanctions on the regime. But that is also at the heart of why Zimbabwe is a failed state. No revolution in history has ever succeeded when the masses have turned out to be incredibly ignorant, naive, and gullible to what the revolution was really truly about. I think one of the most successful revolutions in human history has been the American. And the one notable feature of that revolution was that they had the golden opportunity to have people like Thomas Paine, who clearly articulated what the revolution was about, what they were fighting for. Thomas Paine's common sense came out very early on at the beginning of the American Revolution. And it articulated why Americans had to fight the British for their independence. And the, the authority, the American leaders at the time, took it upon themselves to explain to the people Thomas Paine's ideas, why they had to fight. It is said that George Washington bought a number of the copies of Common Sense, this pamphlet by Thomas Paine, and read it regularly to his soldiers. And the American public itself took to heart the pamphlet. By the time the Civil War, the War of Independence started raging on, the American public had a clear idea of what they were fighting for. Little could be said about other revolutions like ours. The South African revolution, I believe, has been a lot more successful because ANC, credit where credit is due, produced the Freedom Charter, in which they articulated the freedoms, the rights of all South Africans in independent South Africa. And South Africa had the added advantage of having a visionary leader like Nelson Mandela at the formative age of that country when the country gained its independence. Some people don't understand, but I believe that Nelson Mandela's greatest legacy to the people of South Africa is that he was president for the first 5 years, and during that 5 years, the biggest achievement he did was that he consolidated the democratic institutions. He made it real for people to achieve those rights and freedoms that were promised in the Freedom Charter. Zimbabwe did not have that luck. While things like one man, one vote was the rallying call before independence, as we got towards independence, it was lip service to those ideals. It is no secret, but that both ZANU and ZAPU were already committed to a one-party state. They just couldn't agree on which one of them should give in. Because, of course, with the two parties vying for power, the one-party state is untenable unless you unite. There were attempts to unite the two parties. The Patriotic Front was launched as a desperate attempt to unite the two parties. But it also broke up because the two parties could not trust the other, to share power evenly. So the issue of one man, one vote in a one-party state is nonsense. If you're imposing one-party state, you cannot have a free, fair, and credible election where everybody is willing, is got the right to vote for whoever they want, they believe. And so, as I said earlier, in 1980, as we're going towards independence, ZANU-PF selection policy at the time, the elections in 1980, they made it very clear that if the party does not win the elections, the Bush war would continue. That is a clear indication they had absolutely no respect for one man, one vote. And as soon as they got their feet under the desk, they've consolidated that idea, mostly by the launching of the now infamous Gukurahundi, designed whose primary purpose was to coerce ZAPU to give up its claim to being a separate political party. Because ZAPU was the one party that really posed a serious challenge to Mugabe and his friends. Hold on power. So when they signed the 1987 Unity Accord, that cleared the deck for ZANU-PF to impose the de facto one-party state. And Zimbabwe has remained a de facto one-party state to this day. And so the comments that we have seen from ZANU-PF leaders and their fanatical supporters is clearly coming out of a party never believed that every citizen has the right to a meaningful say in the governance of the country. They paid lip service to one man, one vote. In fact, it's conditional. They will accept one man, one vote as long as it doesn't threaten ZANU-PF's hold on power. That is all it's saying. And for the many supporters, including the public, I think it's because they have never really understood what their rights were. As much as I'll be the first one to admit that you do not argue for your rights and free, fair, and credible election when looking up the business end of an AK-47 rifle. Because there's no doubt, of course, that ZANU-PF, in its bid to hang on to power, they were turning the rifle from fighting the whites to fighting the people if they should refuse to accept ZANU-PF rule. And we've seen that mentality repeated again and again, of course, for the last 44 years. ZANU-PF has never hesitated to impose its will by brute force. That's what it's all about. But still, one cannot deny that in 44 years, there had not been many opportunities for the country to end the ZANU-PF dictatorship. There were opportunities. When the MDC was launched in the late 1990s, they promised that they would deliver democratic change, as the party name implied, movement for democratic change. But again, they never really articulated what those democratic changes are. The people themselves never really understood what those democratic changes were. And so when the golden opportunity did arise for MDC, for Morgan Tsvangirai and company to implement those democratic changes during the 2008 to 2013 GNU, they failed to implement even one reform. Not even one. Worse still, ever since the GNU debacle, MDC leaders have been participating in these flawed elections to give ZANU-PF legitimacy in, in exchange for a few gravitating seats. What is interesting here is that the people themselves never understood what those democratic changes were. And hence the reason why when MDC failed to implement even one reform, the people failed to confront Morgan Tsvangirai and company and say to them, what is happening here? Indeed, ever since the GNU debacle, MDC leaders have changed their tune. They've openly stated that they are no longer fighting for democratic change, to implement democratic reforms. They've been fighting to win rigged elections. They've claimed that they've got strategies of how to win rigged elections. And surprise, surprise, most of their wildebeest head followers accepted it. If he had produced anything close to what Thomas Paine produced as the common sense pamphlet, or ANC freedom charter, they would have spelled out what the democratic changes were, and people would now be able to wave that pamphlet at them and saying, you promised to deliver this and you failed to do so. The people themselves would have stopped participating in last year's elections, for instance, convinced that Shamisa had plugged all the vote rigging loopholes. Everybody could see that was just nonsense. How do you plug vote rigging loopholes when you do not even have something as basic and as fundamental for free, fair, and credible election as a verified voter's roll? How do you claim that you have plugged all vote rigging loopholes when ZANU-PF is frog marching the people to attend its rallies and will, come the election, frog march the same people to go and vote for the party? And that is exactly what happened. That is at the heart of why Zimbabwe is a failed state. We have got the ordinary people who are really ignorant of what their rights are and what their obligations are. There is no successful revolution in human history in which the people have been ignorant. That is the reality. And to pretend otherwise is being naive. some of the people in the opposition supporters have attacked my call for reform and saying, well, I mean, the truth here is MDC leaders have failed to implement those reforms. If you're looking at they've been on the political stage for 23 years and they failed to implement even one token reform, it's not rocket science to say, well, they failed to perform. We should get somebody else who can do it. That is common sense. And yet these people will be coming up with meaningless comments like, oh no, the opposition is not to blame for it, for Zimbabwe's failure to hold free, fair, and credible elections. How so? What was the purpose of the MDC being elected? What were you electing them for? If you can't understand why you were electing the opposition, then you shouldn't really be voting. And yet that is at the at the heart of the problem with the opposition supporters. They support the opposition for no better reason than that they are the opposition. They cannot support ZANU-PF, so they support the opposition without knowing what is it exactly the opposition is supposed to be doing. The opposition in Zimbabwe, the primary purpose of the opposition in Zimbabwe was to implement these democratic changes to stop ZANU-PF rigging the elections. If they fail to do so, we accept that they failed to do so. And we should look for an opposition who will implement those reforms. But that is a quantum leap that the opposition have never made. But I think the main reason for it, why they failed to make that quantum leap, is that the opposition has never really articulated what they were going to deliver to the people. Just as much as ZANU-PF has never articulated what they were going to deliver to the people. Ignorance is at the heart of why Zimbabwe is a failed state. I'll just show some comments from one of the public there. Good evening to you, sir. Good evening to you as well. The other comment is, sir, do you really think we have an opposition in our country? If so, what's the way forward? Well, I think if you understood what the opposition is supposed to do, that is the argument I've been making here. And in this particular case, the primary purpose of the opposition in Zimbabwe is not to form the next government. That will come later. The number one purpose of the opposition should be to implement the democratic reforms to stop ZANU-PF rigging the elections. Did the MDC have that chance? They did. Did they implement any reforms? No, they did not. And after 23 years, without even a token reform implemented, it begs us believe that we still have some people who still believe that the opposition, the MDC, is the way forward. So, to come back to your question, what is the way forward? Well, the way forward is for the people to accept that the opposition's primary purpose is to implement reforms. That's number one. Number two, to accept that after 23 years without even a token reform implemented, the MDC/CCC opposition have failed. You have got to go through those two processes, through those two steps, for you to be able to take with confidence the third step. And the third step is, let's search for opposition leaders who will implement the reforms. You don't even need a political party. At the present moment, for instance, last year, participating in those flawed elections gave ZANU-PF legitimacy. So the public themselves are to blame. Why they participated is because they believed that Chamisa had a strategy of winning rigged elections. How naive can you be? We have now abandoned the search for free, fair, and credible elections, for the alternative of winning rigged elections. That is amazing. I don't believe that. Sorry, I'll just post your other comment there, Masiba. You're very right. I had the same question. Why did Chamisa lead us to go and vote if he knew there weren't any voters roll? Well, the answer to that one, Masimba, is actually very simple. It's very clear. You've got to go back to the GNU itself. Why did MDC leaders fail to implement even one token reform during the 5 years when they had the golden opportunity to do so? And the answer to that is Mugabe bribed them with the trappings of high office, the ministerial limos, the general salaries, and for Morgan Tsvangirai, the US $4 million mansion in Highlands. And MDC, in response, they forgot about their reforms. This is a fundamental truth that many of the opposition supporters, they simply cannot swallow. But refusing to accept it does not change reality. That is at the heart of why MDC leaders did not implement reforms. And that is at the heart of why MDC/CCC kept participating in elections. They knew they were flawed. They knew that by participating, they would give ZANU-PF legitimacy. But they kept participating regardless, because they also knew that ZANU-PF was giving away a few seats, a few gravy train seats. This is a truth. To be quite honest, I'm not the one who originated that argument or made that observation, or the only one who did make that observation. Here is a quotation from David Coulthard saying exactly that. This comment was made by David Coulthard regarding the 2013 elections. Many people out there, at least on this platform, have seen me present that argument, making the same reference. And this is also Tendai Biti making a similar argument. Why they refuse to accept it? It's because we are dealing with people who really do not want to accept that the opposition could do anything wrong. That kind of mentality is not conducive to creating a truly democratic nation. Because one of the things that you've got to accept for a healthy and functioning democracy is that this is the power to the people. This is a government of the people, for the people, by the people. And if you're going to be the government and have that power, you have got to know what you're doing. I mean, it's not rocket science. And so that is why you find even the ancient Greeks were absolutely adamant that the people must be educated, they must be knowledgeable, and they must be diligent. You must hold those who hold public office to account. But you can only do so if you know what is happening. If you don't know that the opposition's primary purpose was to implement reforms to stop ZANU-PF rigging the elections, even now with the benefit of hindsight, you really shouldn't have the vote. Because the politicians will only exploit your ignorance to advance their own selfish needs. There's no doubt that Nelson Chamisa knew that ZANU-PF was rigging 2023 elections, but he also knew that if he participates and gives ZANU-PF legitimacy, he and his friends will have the benefit of the few gravy train seats and they will enjoy the benefits. In this case here, it didn't quite work out because as it happened, as we know, in stepped Savangu. And they started recalling those who had won those few gravy train seats. And there was panic in Triple C. Triple C is all but imploded. But that is another story. They had participated knowing fully well that the elections were good and that by participating they'll give ZANU-PF legitimacy. ZANU-PF got what it wanted. Those few who won, they thought for a minute that they were comfortable. They couldn't wait to take their oath of office, only to find themselves in a panic as Savangu started recalling those elected members. The issue of a public that must be educated cannot be put aside. As long as we have got ignorant, naive, and gullible electorate, Zimbabwe will never be a healthy and functioning democracy. That is the truth. If people don't even understand that MDC, Triple C guys sold out, even now with the benefit of hindsight, well, what can I say? You really don't deserve anything else. As well, I'll hear that last comment from you, Masimba. Can I just say that in future, if you want to participate, I will send you a link so that you could make your comments as well if you don't mind coming live. But now I've just been um, talking for 34 minutes, and I know that there are some people who complained that if it's too big, they've got problems with their data. So I'm afraid I've got to close this one. But I'll read out your last comment. True say, so we are not anywhere closer to a new Zimbabwe. It's disheartening. It's long overdue. 43 years, young generation doesn't know how to use a simple ATM. Well, my heart goes to them as well. And at the present moment, Zimbabwe is sinking. There cannot be any denying that fact. This vision 2030 is a mirage. Mugabe has been giving us that mirage, and we've been chasing it ever since the country's independence. Those of us old enough to have been alive in 1980 will tell you Mugabe's favorite phrase was Gusaroshinji, mass prosperity, and he never seemed to tire of it. But of course, he never delivered Gusaroshinji, and that is the truth. It was just a mirage. Um, by the late 1990s, when he was forced into the um, structural adjustment program, the, the nation was told that they needed to tighten up, give up a number of things that he had already promised in the 1980s, such as free education, free healthcare, and salaries were very generous, and they had introduced price controls on goods and so forth, and those were being lifted. And we're told that we needed only to tighten up and things will get better. They never did. And in the 1990s, the vision was 2000, we'll have Kutsaro Shinji. And when 2000 approached and the country was still sinking deeper and deeper into the economic depression, the mirage was moved to 2020. And as we can see now, we are 2030. The country is sinking economically. The infrastructure is not there. Millions of people, particularly young people, have never worked. Some of them have gone to college. You know, you come out hoping that you'll get a good job, and only to find that the only job that's open for you is joining the hundreds of thousands doing the informal work, selling airtime and that sort of thing. That it is tragic, and the country's economic recovery is doomed. You cannot have any meaningful economic recovery when you are wasting so many of your of, of your um, human resources, and also when you are looting at the scale at which ZANU-PF is looting the resources like diamonds, gold, and so forth. So we are in serious trouble. But the only way I come back to ending the economic crisis is by stopping ZANU-PF rigging the elections. There is no other way. As long as ZANU-PF remains in government, you will never stamp out corruption. You will never stamp out gross mismanagement. That is the truth. And in fact, some of the wealth looted, the looted wealth, is being used to bankroll the regime to make it stay in power. It could afford to bribe the judges, bribe the election officials, bribe the police, top brass in the police, in the army, the CIO, and so forth, to help them, for them to help ZANU-PF stay in power. They even bribed the opposition. There cannot be any denying that many of the opposition leaders have been in politics and have always done ZANU-PF's bidding, pretending that they are opposition. In reality, they are not. I said it on this platform and I'll say it again. MDC Triple C has been ZANU-PF Team B in all but name. And Team B was playing for Team A to win and to have legitimacy. And if you think that is the way forward, then, you deserve to suffer. Thank you very much, Masimba, for joining me, and whoever else was able to join us. And we hope that we'll have more of these regularly. We have got a regular airing on at 7 o'clock UK time, 6 o'clock or 8 o'clock Zimbabwe time. So if you can join us, you're welcome. Thank you and good night.